How's your heart today? Some kinds of care are so quiet, we only recognize them after they have already carried us. This episode is for anyone who once thought they were handling life alone, only to realize later that someone had been making the days softer in small, steady ways. Not with grand words, but with warmed food, charged phones, lights left on, and questions that arrived at exactly the right moment. Tonight's theme is being cared for without ever noticing it. The first letter comes from someone who misunderstood her father for years. Lirait. I used to think my father was only good at practical things. He woke up early, packed lunches, checked the gate at night, and always noticed if the gas tank was low. My mother was the one who hugged me and asked what was wrong, so I built a simple story about him. Responsible, yes. Tender, no. That story followed me into adulthood. If I stayed out late, he texted, call when done. If it rained, he wrote, bring umbrella. If I forgot to eat, he somehow knew and sent, eat first. I wanted emotional language, and all I saw was management. I never considered that he might have been speaking in a language I did not respect yet. A few winters ago, I came home from my mother's birthday feeling more exhausted than I admitted. Work had been draining. My lease was ending. I had also just gone through a breakup I did not tell my parents about because I didn't want to explain the embarrassment of being left slowly. Late that night I went into the kitchen for water and found my father peeling an apple under the stove light. He asked, couldn't sleep? I said no. He cut the apple into small slices and pushed the plate toward me. Then, without looking right at me, he said, work is hard? I laughed and said, work is always hard. He nodded once and replied, you look tired when you smile. That sentence undid me. I had been performing okayness so well that even I started believing it during the day. But he had noticed the exact place where my face stopped matching my life. I cried at the kitchen table. He didn't ask me to explain. He just set the tissue box near my hand and stayed there. After a while he said, when you were little, I knew you were getting sick before the fever. Same face. That was when I realized he had always been watching closely. Not dramatically, carefully. In the quiet way of someone who studies your needs, so he can meet them before they become emergencies. The next day, I started noticing things I had somehow edited out of my own life. My blanket had already been washed before I arrived. The medicine drawer had the pain reliever I prefer. There was cut fruit in the fridge with my name on it. My scooter was fueled. The porch light was always left on if I came home after dark. My mother said it casually while putting away dishes. Your dad keeps track. Keeps track. That phrase explained so much. I had spent years thinking he didn't really know me, while he had been memorizing me through maintenance, through timing, through all the unremarkable ways a person can make another person's life easier. A few weeks after I returned to the city, soup from the place I used to eat in college showed up at my apartment door. My father had gotten my address from my cousin and ordered it without saying anything first. I called and asked, you sent this? He answered like it was obvious, you sound tired. For years, I thought love had to sound beautiful before I could trust it. But sometimes it sounds like someone remembering what helps your body rest. I used to think my father was only practical. Now I know I was living inside his care long before I learned how to name it. The love I almost missed was never missing at all. Post-transition, sometimes care is so consistent, we mistake it for background noise. Then one small sentence lets us hear it clearly. Relatable. I thought my best friend was just organized. She carried tissues, remembered birthdays, checked train times, and always had a charger in her bag. In every group, she was the useful one. I admired that, but in a shallow way. I thought she was efficient. I didn't understand that efficiency can be another form of devotion. We met at work in our 20s. I was louder, messier, always late. She was calm in a way that made people speak honestly around her. Our friendship grew through ordinary things, split pastries, overtime walks to the station, screenshots of ridiculous client emails. If I mentioned a presentation once, she asked how it went 3 days later. If I said I had a headache, she dimmed the brightness on my screen before I touched the setting. I noticed these things, but I filed them under personality. I never called them love. Then my relationship started ending in the quietest way possible. No betrayal, no dramatic fight. We had simply become polite too early. Dinner turned into logistics. Conversations became updates. I knew what it felt like to sit next to someone and still feel alone. My best friend never cornered me with big questions. She didn't ask, "Are you sure you're happy?" She asked, "Do you want me to bring dinner? Or should I call after your meeting?" I didn't realize it then, but she was offering care without demanding a confession. One night I stayed at the office long after everyone left because going home felt heavier than fluorescent lights and spreadsheets. Around 9, I went downstairs and found her in the lobby holding a hot canned drink. I stared and said, "What are you doing here?" She said, "You mentioned your train card was empty." I had said that casually hours earlier. She held out the drink and added, "I figured you'd be too tired to stop and reload it." She had waited for me because of that. She lived 40 minutes in the opposite direction. A month later, the relationship finally ended at our kitchen table. Nothing explosive happened. We just admitted what had already been true for too long: something necessary was gone. After he left, the apartment became so quiet it almost felt staged. Then there was a knock at the door. My best friend was standing there with a grocery bag and my spare charger. I asked, "How did you know?" She said, "You only send a thumbs up that late when you're trying not to talk." Inside the bag were noodles, tissues, yogurt drinks, and green onions. Not flowers, not wine. Just the exact things a person might need on the first night of being suddenly alone. She stepped inside and asked, "Do you want company or quiet company?" I have never forgotten that question. Not what happened. Not, "Are you okay?" Just company or quiet company. I chose quiet company. She made noodles, plugged in my dead phone, put a glass of water beside me, and said, "Sleep on the couch tonight. Your bed will feel strange." She was right. Again, we barely spoke. She stayed until I fell asleep and left a note for the morning. "Eat something before coffee. Text me after your shower." I kept that note for a year. After that, I started seeing how often she had quietly caught me before I fell. The seat she saved me at crowded work events. The extra socks in her bag the day my shoes were ruined by rain. The yearly message around my grandmother's death that simply said, "Take today gently." I had mistaken her thoughtfulness for competence because it was easier than admitting it had changed the texture of my life. A year later, when things were better, we sat outside a convenience store near the beach eating terrible ice cream before dinner. I said, trying to sound casual, "You took care of me a lot last year." She said, "You would have done the same." Maybe I would have, but I don't know if I would have known how to help as precisely as she did. We still live busy lives now. We answer slower. We reschedule dinners. But every now and then a message from her appears. "Take a jacket tonight." And it lands with the weight of a whole history. For years, I thought she was just practical. Now I know she was loving me in a language so steady, I almost confused it with air. Host transition. Not every important person arrives with a title. Sometimes they simply keep noticing you until your life feels more livable. Relatable. The person who cared for me most during one of the loneliest years of my life was not my partner, not my family, and not someone I ever posted about. It was my upstairs neighbor. When I moved into that apartment building, she was just the woman in 4B who watered a plant on the landing every Thursday evening. We knew each other in the way neighbors do: elevator nods, comments about the weather, small door, holding rituals. At the time, I was in the first year after my mother died. People were kind in the beginning. Friends brought food, family called, but grief changed the shape of ordinary living in ways nobody really warned me about. I forgot groceries, let laundry sit overnight, ate crackers for dinner, kept my apartment just functional enough to pass as normal. I wasn't falling apart in a dramatic way. I was simply carrying life badly. My neighbor started knocking on my door on Sundays around noon. The first time she held a glass container and said, "I made too much soup." The next week she brought rice and vegetables. The week after, banana bread. She never stayed long unless I invited her, and she never asked heavy questions. Instead she asked, "Have you opened your windows today?" Or, Are you still drinking coffee on an empty stomach? Once she looked at my face and said, "You don't have to answer messages today. The world can wait one more afternoon." I laughed because it was impossible that a near stranger had identified the exact guilt sitting on my chest. Then I noticed the pattern. The food came most often on weekends, when loneliness is loudest. If I had been coming home late all week, she brought something filling. When winter got colder, she taped a note near my bell that said, "Put a towel at the bottom of your door. The hallway gets cold." It was practical, slightly bossy, and weirdly comforting. One night the power went out in the building. We all stood in the hallway lit by our phones. I apologized for looking awful after work, and she said, "You always say sorry before you say tired." No one had ever said that to me before. A few weeks later she saw me taking out the trash at almost 9 at night and asked, "Dinner?" I admitted the bag was mostly cereal boxes and takeaway containers. She nodded and said, "Come upstairs for 10 minutes." Her apartment was warm in a very particular way, like someone had spent years choosing the same gentle lamplight. She gave me tea and half a toasted sandwich and asked me nothing dramatic at all. Before I left, she wrapped the other half in a napkin and handed it to me. At the door she said, "Loss is tiring. You should eat as if you know that." That line still lives inside me. After that, I started stopping by sometimes after work. She told me how to warm plates before soup. She corrected how I stored onions. She gave me back a washed container and said, "You missed the corner," then smiled so I knew I was allowed to laugh. There was never a formal conversation where I said, "You are helping me survive." If anyone had asked, I probably still would have called her my nice neighbor upstairs. What I couldn't see yet was that she had become a witness to my life returning. She noticed when I started opening my windows again, when I wore different sweaters instead of the same one all week, when I bought cheap flowers and put them in a jar by the sink. She glanced through my open door one afternoon, saw the flowers, and said only, "Better." Not fixed, not healed, just better. On the 1-year anniversary of my mother's death, I told no one what day it was. I came home from work and found a paper bag hanging from my doorknob. Inside was a slice of lemon cake from the bakery and a note in careful handwriting. "Some dates ask more from us. Eat something sweet tonight." Maybe she remembered. Maybe she had simply paid enough attention to the calendar of my sadness to sense the shape of it. Either way, it felt like being held without being watched. A few months later, she moved closer to her son. Before leaving, she gave me the plant from the landing and said, "It likes light, but not too much. Water when the soil feels dry, not when you feel guilty." After she left, the stairwell felt emptier than it should have. But some version of her care remained in the habits she had quietly returned to me. I started keeping fruit in the house, opening the windows, eating before sadness turned into dizziness, letting the world wait one more afternoon when necessary. I used to think care only counted when it came from people with official roles in your life. But sometimes the person holding part of you together is simply the one who notices your hallway light has not turned on yet. I never told my upstairs neighbor how much she mattered that year. So maybe this is my way of saying it now. You fed me in a season when I could not fully feed myself. You spoke to me as if being tired was not a failure. You helped my life feel livable again before I was ready to call that healing. Some people enter your story quietly and leave fingerprints on the way you survive. Host closing. If these letters stayed with you, maybe it is because love is not always absent when it feels invisible. Sometimes it is already there, hidden inside routines, remembered details, practical kindness, and the people who soften a day without asking to be thanked. Maybe someone cared for you in ways you only understand now. Maybe you have done that for someone else. If this episode made you feel a little less alone, like, subscribe, and share your thoughts with Mindlight when you're ready. Until then, be gentle with the ordinary love in your life. It may be carrying more than you know.